Mem Ches Amud Beis. We'll begin Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph at the end of the last line. Omara Kav Melugma Lepischa. A Kav of Melugma, which we're assuming at this point means a regular Kav. That's the measure, the maximum amount which you can knead dough on for Pesach without being concerned that it will come to Chimutz. As we said before, when you're constantly working the dough, you're kneading it, that inhibits the Chimutz. If it's a large quantity, it's a large amount, then you can't work it sufficiently, and we're afraid that it will lie dormant and become Chometz. So this is the maximum amount of that you can have, this measure of kneading dough on Pesach, where we're not concerned with a chimutz. And this is, as far as challah is concerned, this is the minimum amount. As far as challah is concerned, for challah you have to have a certain minimum amount. It says, Reishis Arisei Sechem, the first of Arisei Sechem, of your food, of your bread, that you have to be mafresh challah from you have to separate from your dough. So Reishis Arisei Sechem, the first of your dough. What is your dough? So that's the amount of the mon they had in the midbar. And what was the amount they had in the midbar? That's an oimer. An oimer is a series ha'efa. Now there's a difference in the measurements over time. The measurements were enlarged and changed over time. So it translates to something approximating a kav. At this point, we're assuming that as far as challah is concerned, you have to have a minimum of a kav. But we learned Tanya or Vatsanan, we learned chameshes ravoim kemach. It's not one kav. It's 5 quarters, meaning a kav and a quarter chayavin b'challah. That's the minimum shear for challah. Where it says hachi kamar kav malugma nami haishor koi. We're saying in chanami, kav malugma is not like we thought originally that it's the size of a regular kav. The kav maluganoi is a kav and a quarter. It's larger. It's a kav and a quarter. So that is the minimum shear for challah, the maximum shear for Pesach. Omer of Yosef, Hani Noshiti done. He said, our women no gemefa kapisa lepischa. They were machmir, and they were knowing only to bake 3/4 of a kav at one time. Now, even though we said before you can bake up to 1 1/4 kavim, but they were machmir, only to do 3/4 of a kav. What's the reasoning? The churma, they want to be machmir, but he said it's a churma dasli de kulo. It's a churma that will lead to a kula, the kamafkele machala. Because if they only bake that portion at a time, they won't be able to be makayim the mitzvah of challah. They don't have the minimum amount that's needed for the mitzvah of challah. Omerle, he said, they have an answer for that. Dav and Rabbi Lezer. They hold like Rabbi Lezer. Now we learned that it's not Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer says, right of a nice in the sal, if he removes the loaves of bread from the oven and he puts them in a basket, hasal mitzar challah. The basket will combine them for challah. They'll be considered combined, and therefore, if you have smaller loaves, you put them in a basket, and now they join together, they're considered joined together, and now you have the minimum shear that you need for challah. And that's the challah. That's the halacha, rather. That's halacha is like Rabbi Lezer. And therefore, they have that eitzah, so the machmer legabe Pesach, and therefore they use a smaller shear. But then they combine it in the basket, and therefore, since halach is like Rabbi Lezer, they can now be mekayim the mitzvah of challah. Amrle, Abaya asked on that, Itmar Allah, but we learned regarding this that Amar Rishu ben Levi Loishan al Kikara Shel Bavel Shem Naishach Zubazu. Where did we say that where they can combined? That's only the Kikaras of Bavel that are bigger and thicker, and therefore they touch each other. Literally, they bite each other. Meaning, when they're in the oven, they expand and they stick together, so that if you would try to pull them apart, they would be stuck together, and you'd be pulling apart, and some of it would be torn from the other part of it, from the other kikar. But if they're narrow, they don't bite, meaning they don't get stuck together, they're not attached together. So if they don't bite, they aren't attached in the oven. Even when you put them in the basket, they're not considered to be combined for challah. Now over here we're talking in the case where in the oven they only bake it one at a time, where it's below the threshold, it's below the minimum shear for challah. So there's no combining in the oven, no biting in the oven to make it up into one shear. He says that it's only that we say that the basket combines it if they have in the oven. They'll be stuck together, they're touching each other and stuck together. And then you put it in the basket, then we say it's considered one, and then you have the minimum shear. But otherwise not. And in this case, we're talking where they baked only less than the shear at one time. He says no, but he says that the basket is a salz misarfen, even if they're long and narrow, meaning they don't touch each other, they're not stuck together in the oven. Then even then we would say that. I go, there's a machlokes Taisus, and it seems to be Rashi, it seems to be machlokes with Rashi, if we say that this is necessary even when they're kneaded together. According to Taisus, if they're all kneaded together, then they're kneaded together as one large quantity of one batch together, then even though they're baked separately, we don't need the sal mitzarfen, you don't need that syrup because they were all kneaded together, and you had the shear when they were kneaded together as the dough. But it's mashal from Rashi that no, even then, we still need, if you're being mafresh the challah only after it's baked, even then you need the sal to be mitzarfen. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah, the following shaila tablish in the levazim. We'll say you don't have a basket, you have a board that doesn't have a rim. Is that mitzarefet or not? Do you need the inside of the kli? And it's a board, it's a flat board, you don't have that. Or do you say that you need the airspace of the kli to combine them, and that does exist on the board? Teiku, it's a teiku. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Lezer Oimer, Hasal mitzarf. He says the basket is mitzarf, like we learned before. Rabbi Shu Oimer, Tana mitzarf, and he says even if you don't put it subsequently in a basket, the Tana that it's baked in the oven, that's mitzarf, and it's mitzarf if it's in the oven, and even if they don't bite, even if they're not touching each other. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says if they're thick like the kikoros of Bavel, that they get stuck together, that they bite each other, then they're mitzaref even if they're not placed in the basket. But they have to be noishchas. They have to be not long and narrow. They're not mitzarefet. So that's the shita of the Tanakama of the Mishnah. Zok the Mishnah, right? Rabbi Gamliel says, Sholosh Noshim Loshes Kachas. 3 women can knead their own batches of dough at the same time. And then they can bake it in an oven one after another. If you have a small oven, there's only room in the oven to bake one at a time. So nevertheless, he holds that they can knead the dough at the same time. Now, even though that means that after they complete the kneading, one will bake and the other chalas will be lying dormant without kneading. And as we said before, that without working it, lying dormant hastens the chimutz. Nevertheless, he says that they can do it. We're not concerned about the chimutz. That by the time that they are allowed to bake it, that short period of time, that we're not worried that it'll come the day chimutz. The Chachamim say, however, they're all occupied with the dough at the same time. Then if they are doing it at the same time, they're kneading at the same time, they have to do it in this order. Achas lasha, va'achas oireches, va'achas oifa. They have to do it in this order if they're all occupied with the dough, they can't do it on the way that Rabbi Gamliel says, that they all do the kneading at the same time and they bake it one after the other. We are concerned that it'll come lidei chimutz. The first one does the kneading. Now, when she does the kneading, then the other one shapes it into a dough, and the other one bakes it. Meaning, they have 3 stages of the baking of the bread. First, you knead it, you shape it into form, and you bake it. So the first one kneads the dough. The other ones don't start yet. Now, when the first one completes the kneading, then the second one starts to knead. The first one does the shaping of the dough. The third one doesn't start yet. Now, when the first one finishes the shaping, she puts it in the oven. The second one finishes the kneading, and she now does the shaping. Then the third one, she starts the kneading. Then, after the first one is baked, the second one puts hers in the oven, and the third one does the shaping. And then when the second one is baked, then the third one puts hers in the oven. So they're constantly occupying with it. It's not lying dormant at any point in time. It's not lying dormant. Rabbi Kiva argues with Rabbi Gamliel. He says, how can you say that 3 women can bake at the same time, can be Isaac with it at the same time? How can you say that? Because they're not all equal. How can you say that when 3 people are doing their kneading their dough at the same time, that by the time that one takes her batch and bakes it in the oven, the other one's waiting, it won't be the shear that'll come lidei chimutz? There's not a standard time. There's so many different variables, and so maybe in some cases, then that would be the case. But in other cases, where it might take them longer to do it, that it'll be lying dormant for a longer period of time, and it will come lidei chimutz. He says, "Lo kol hanashim," not all the women, not kol ha'etzim, lo kol tarim shavim. Not everything bakes the same speed at the same time. Not all the women knead the dough at the same time. So in some cases, yes, it's true. In some cases, it won't come lidei chimutz. The oven will be available. They can put it in the oven before it comes lidei chimutz. But in other cases, it will take longer to bake, and the dough will be remaining dormant for a longer period of time, and it will come lidei chimutz. Rabbi Gamliel answers, "Klal tavach til tashbet sainan." He says, but the eitzah is that if it starts to swell, they put cold water on it. That will inhibit the chimutz, and that will prevent the chimutz. And that's the eitzah. Tanrabanan. So we said in the Chachamim, they do it in terms of, so to speak, an assembly line. As we mentioned before, what's the process that 3 people could be Isaac in at the same time? The first one kneads the dough. Then when she finishes, then she is Isaac in the kituf, and she shapes it. And her friend starts to knead. Now she starts the kneading. The number 2 starts the kneading. Then mekatefes he aifem. When the first one finishes the shaping, she puts it in the oven, she bakes it, and number 2 starts the shaping of her dough. And the third one starts her kneading. When the first woman has baked her dough, then she starts again. She starts the process again, and she starts kneading a second batch. And the second one, she does her baking. The third one does the shaping. So we have, so to speak, this assembly line. As long as they're involved in it, they're occupied with the dough, it doesn't come lidei chimutz. Rabbi Kiva he says that not all the women do it at the same speed. Tanya Amar Rabbi Kiva Danti Lifnei Rabbi Gamliel Ilamdeinu Rabbeinu Benoshim Zrizois Benoshim Sheinu Zrizois. Well, we're talking about the 3 people are talking about ones who do it quickly, who are energetic or not. Be'etzim lachem or etzim yaveshim is talking about damp wood or dry wood, meaning does it burn quickly or not? Metanor cham, metanor tzainin. Was the oven already heated up or was it cold? Amar li, ein l'chol mashishanu achachamim. You only have what the Chacham taught. Klal tapach til tashbet seinen. The klal is, if it starts to swell, you put cold water on it, and that will inhibit the chimus. That's the eitzah. That's the eitzah that we have for it. So the Mishnah, siur yisarif. Siur, it has to be burned. Siur is not saor. Saor is sourdough, and that's, the Torah says that has the isser of bal yirah, bal yamotze. That's chametz. We're talking about siur, which is dough that is what we call, it was referred to before as chametz nuksha. That it's a dough that is incomplete. The chimutz is incomplete, and it's incomplete chimutz, meaning that it is a inferior chametz. It's inferior from its inception. So what do we do with it? It has to be burnt. Series sarf. But v'ha'eichla potter. But if one eats it, he's potter from malchus, he's potter from kares. I mean, as we learned before, we have the droshes to say that minatera, it's not considered to be chametz. It's inferior dough. It's inferior dough, and from its inception, and therefore it's not considered to be a chametz and midoraisa, and therefore he's not over. But it has to be burnt. It has to be burnt. That is the way the Ran learns, and that's the way the most Forshim learn, that there's no Isser Deraisa, but Midorabanan, it has to be burnt. There are some who want to have it sound to say that if there is an Isser over here involved, it's not considered a chametz, but it's incomplete chametz, and therefore the Torah says Shivas Yomi Masechet Pesachim, if it's made out of grain and it's not matzah, it's not chametz, but it's not matzah either. And therefore you're over on this essay of matzah Pesachim. So that is siur. Siduk yisaref. Now if it has cracks in it, then it has to be burned. Va'oichla chayav kares. Then you are chayav kares. So if it has it's past the sear stage, it starts to develop cracks or furrows, then this is considered to be chametz gomur, and therefore not only does it has to be burned, there is a chayav kares. Ezeo siur. So what is the siur stage? That is kikarne achagavim. If it has that cracks that are not interlaced, they're just like the antennas of locusts, so they're fine cracks, and they are on the surface, and they don't crisscross. So at that stage, it's still considered only siur. It's not considered siduk. Siduk, what's the stage of siduk? How do we classify that? When they're interlaced, when they crisscross with each other. Div Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. No. Once there's cracks on it, even if it's karne chagavim, that's considered to be not siur, that's considered to be siduk. And therefore, there would be a chiyav kores. Ve'ezeo siur. What is the siur that we're talking about, where we say that there's no chiyav kores? That is kol shechsif upon kadam shamdu saroisav. That is a person who is pale, that the dough is pale. It's like a person who is scared, and his hair stands on end because he's frightened, he's scared. So when the dough turns very pale, so that is the beginning of the chimutz process. It's incomplete chametz, but it's not chametz gomer. They say that is the siur stage. But any kind of cracks, they hold that's the siduk stage, and there would be a chiyav kares. Tan rabbanan ezeu siur. What is the classification of siur? Kol shechsiv upanav ka'adam shamdu saroisav. Like what if it's pale, like a person who's frightened and he's pale, and his hair stands on end. Siduk is kikarne chagavim. It's like the cracks that have like the antennas of locusts. Div Rameir. That's what Rameir says. They say siur is where it's cracked. When they crisscross. I frag the Gemara, what do you mean? Vanan Tanan series Saraf Oichla Potter. Our Mishnah learned that series Saraf Oichla is Potter. Diver Rav Yehuda, that's Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda says that he is on the case of a Sior, that is over here. He says Oichla Potter. Now over here in this brayso over here, the first opinion is Rabbi Meir. The sheet of the Chachamim, that has to be the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, in the brayso it says, and is a siduk ish and isarvu, and but in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that sior oichla is potter, that sior is potter. More says, Ema Rabbi Meir, zeh oichla chayav karas. According to Rabbi Meir, both of these definitions of what Rabbi Yehuda said, what the Chacham said, that karne siduk, whether it's karne chagovim or whether it's nisarvu sadakim zeh, in both of these cases, that we say that it's both of them. We have cracks, whether they're interlaced or not. Then, according to Rabbi Meir, you're chayav kares. There's no distinction in both cases. You're chayav kares for that. Amar Rava, my time is Rabbi Meir, but what should be that? Why should we say that? Meaning, the way Sfas Emes learns is, we know that when something is chometz, when it's chometz, we say that it's interlaced, and then we see it's completely chometz. So something which is less than that, when it only has gekane chagovim, that should indicate that the chimutz has not been complete. So why should we say that any type of crack, even kikane chagovim, is considered chametz gomer? Because he answers in the chakol sedek v'sedek milmala shein l'chol kama sedakim milmata, even though on top it's not crisscross, it's not interlaced, but beneath the surface it is. If it's to the point where it's even any cracks on the surface, even kikane chagovim, that means that beneath the surface it is interlaced and it's chametz gomer.